Before becoming a symbol of luxury, she was just a woman, writing her final letter on the brink of death. Marie Antoinette, the queen who became synonymous with extravagance, was hated, ridiculed, and blamed for a nation in crisis. But in the early hours of October 16, 1793, hours before facing the guillotine, she was no longer the controversial figure of Versailles. She was merely a mother, a sister, a woman confronting the end. In this handwritten letter, with a heart already resigned, she reveals far more than words. She unveils the collapse of an empire, the end of an era, and the quiet strength of a farewell that would echo for centuries. Prepare to discover not the queen of gilded halls, but the intimate voice of Marie Antoinette, silenced by the crowd, yet preserved on paper. Marie Antoinette was born an Archduchess of Austria, daughter of the formidable Empress Maria Theresa. At 14, she was sent to France to marry the Dauphin Louis Auguste, the future Louis XVI. The marriage aimed to seal a political alliance between the Austrian Habsburgs and the French Bourbons. Thus, as a teenager, she was torn from her homeland and thrust into the heart of one of Europe's most rigid and opulent courts, the Palace of Versailles. Over time, Marie Antoinette became both a source of fascination and deep resentment. Detached from the suffering of the French people, she was nicknamed Madame Deficit, accused of lavish spending in times of crisis. The famous phrase, "let them eat cake," though likely never spoken by her, became a symbol of the monarchy's supposed disdain. Her lifestyle, parties, and apparent indifference to social unrest fueled growing public hatred. What began as distrust turned into rebellion, and the Queen's public image was distorted, from a graceful sovereign to the people's villain. The French Revolution, starting in 1789, reflected a nation in collapse. Hunger, extreme poverty, and social inequality were rampant. The court of Versailles, with its immense wealth and excesses, stood in stark contrast to the misery of the French people. Social tensions reached a breaking point, and in 1792 the monarchy was abolished, with Louis XVI arrested, tried, and soon executed by guillotine. Marie Antoinette, now a widow, was taken to the Temple prison, where she spent months isolated and humiliated. The former queen, once adorned in luxurious gowns, was now confined to a cold, filthy cell, awaiting a trial that would seal her fate. Her suffering was no longer a matter of politics. It was personal, human, and a tragedy of epic proportions. As the empire she knew crumbled, she prepared to face the same violence that had marked her husband's death. During her captivity, the public continued to demand her execution. The anger once focused on her extravagance now targeted her very existence and the end of the monarchy. Yet within the prison walls, the queen was no longer a symbol of opulence, but a woman grappling with her own end. In the early hours of October 16, 1793, just hours before being taken to the guillotine, Marie Antoinette wrote her final letter. The moment was tense and agonizing. She knew she would not survive that day. The letter was addressed to her sister-in-law, Madame Elizabeth, with whom she shared a deep affection, a gesture of love and care, even as her own life was about to be taken. The letter was written in secret, not meant to be delivered, but as a final expression of her feelings and thoughts. Marie Antoinette conveys her pain over the separation from her children, whom she knew would be victims of the system that had condemned her. There is no trace of anger or resentment in her words. Instead, there is a tone of resignation, faith, and forgiveness for all that had been done to her. She writes, "I forgive all my enemies the harm they have done me. Farewell, my good and tender sister, may this letter reach you." These simple, direct words conveyed a serene surrender. There were no pleas for her life, no rebellion against her judges or accusers. She accepted her fate, but with the dignity of a woman who, despite everything, knew her life had value, as did the lives of those she loved. The letter never reached Madame Elizabeth but was found after the execution, a hidden treasure amid the ashes of her personal tragedy. Marie Antoinette's letter reveals, in a striking way, a human being who was not just the queen, vilified by propaganda, but a mother, a wife, a sister, whose end was marked by the brutality of a revolution that swept the nation along with it. The day of the execution arrived, and the scene was as dramatic as the fate awaiting her. Marie Antoinette was taken from the prison in the early morning. Initially, she was carried through the streets of Paris in a cart, her hands tied behind her back, in a procession of public humiliation. The jeers of the crowd mingled with shouts and mockery as she made her way to the Place de la Révolution, the site of her imminent death. But what is remarkable is that, despite the visible pain and suffering, she maintained a dignified posture. She did not bow her head. On the contrary, her gaze remained raised until the end. It was as if she still held the strength her reign had demanded, even when all that remained was her own humanity. Her courage in the face of death became a symbol of what many saw as the tragedy of an era. The guillotine, a symbol of revolutionary justice, awaited, ready to behead a woman who, in the eyes of her executioners, represented the decay of a failed system. The impact of the execution was felt throughout France and beyond. For many, it marked the end of an era, the overthrow of absolute monarchy, the fall of the aristocratic system that had governed the country for centuries. However, Marie Antoinette's execution also sparked divisions. Some saw her as a victim of the revolution, others as responsible for the excesses that had fueled the uprising. But what no one could deny was the symbolism of her death. A queen, a woman of luxury and power, reduced to nothing more than a prisoner, marching toward her own execution. The crowd that once despised her now watched the scene, many with heads bowed, others with a certain respect for her dignity until the final moment. The spectacle of her death was also the end of a regime, but her sacrifice would become, in the eyes of many, an allegory of the decay and suffering of an entire monarchy. After her execution, Marie Antoinette's figure was treated with complexity by history. The letter she wrote in her final hours, with a tone of acceptance and forgiveness, stood in stark contrast to the public image that had spread about her over the years, the image of a frivolous and detached queen. In the years that followed, this letter became a symbol of martyrdom. For monarchists, it represented the last attempt at dignity by a woman who, despite all criticism, never bowed to the revolution. For many, it was the expression of a queen who was a victim of the cruelest circumstances, her life shattered by the intolerance of a revolution that spared neither the most powerful. Her letter, discovered only after her death, was read by many as a testament to the tragedy of a woman who, in her final moments, displayed a rare clarity of spirit, overcoming anger or resentment in favor of a forgiveness she deemed necessary. But the real question, which unfolded over the years, was to what extent she was truly a victim of a system that placed her in a position of power she may not have fully controlled. The letter, far from being a direct defense or a plea for mercy, was a farewell from a woman who, facing the end, surrendered with an almost supernatural calm. She did not seek to justify her actions or her position, but simply made peace with the idea of her imminent death. The letter, in its simplicity, revealed a woman who was more than what history and the revolution chose to portray. Instead of a proud and distant monarch, she emerged as a mother and wife with emotions and vulnerabilities common to any human being. And yet, despite losing everything, her dignity and faith endured. In a way, Marie Antoinette's letter became a symbol of resilience in suffering, a reflection of what remains when all power and luxury vanish, the essence of who we are when there is nothing left to lose. What truly remains of a reign when power and glory fade, and only solitude before death remains? Marie Antoinette's letter offers a moving and, at the same time, unsettling answer. At the end of her life, she was no longer the Queen of France, but simply a woman facing her fate with courage and dignity. Her farewell was not one of anger or resentment, but of a serene forgiveness that often eludes even the calmest hearts. This moment of reflection leads us to ponder, what is power, after all, if not a game of shadows and light? where even the highest thrones can crumble with a single act of revolution. The letter Marie Antoinette wrote is a reminder that, in the end, what matters are the choices we make, even in the face of adversity. Even as death approaches, the way we choose to say goodbye can leave an eternal legacy. She was a woman who lived a life full of contradictions, loved and hated, wealthy and lost, powerful and fragile. Her letter, written in the early hours before being taken to the guillotine, may be the last chance she had to speak to the world not as the queen adorned with a crown and lavish gowns, but as the woman who, facing death, remembered love and humanity. What remains of her story? What remains of a monarch toppled by revolution? The answer may lie in the words she wrote, in the words of forgiveness, of farewell, and of words that, even after more than 2 centuries, still touch hearts and echo in the annals of history. If her letter teaches us anything, it is that, even in the darkest hours, our words have the power to transcend time. A simple farewell, penned in a cold autumn dawn, can outlive revolution, hatred, and distorted memory, until it becomes an eternal symbol of resilience and humanity. If this story touched your heart, imagine how many other letters are waiting to be discovered. Letters of pain, of love, of sacrifice, of stories that changed destinies. Subscribe to Lost Letters to keep exploring the secrets time forgot. And if this letter moved you, share this video with someone who values words that span generations. Here, every letter reveals a piece of the human soul.